Many students are eager to jump right into their research and start gathering sources. That's understandable. However, we strongly recommend that you pause and take a few minutes to set up a research plan first. This quick project will save you hours of time and effort over the course of your research. The research plan helps you decide what's important in your research. Often a research project sounds straightforward in the beginning. Then, as you start reading more about the topic, you see dozens of interesting tangents and related areas to explore. Your research plan helps you decide whether to follow that tangent or if you can dismiss it as being irrelevant to your project. The research plan also provides direction to your research by showing what you've already accomplished, what the next steps would be, and where you still have work to do. This is extremely valuable when you need to work in short bursts, like a bit of your lunch break and then the 10 minutes before your next meeting starts. You won't waste half your time deciding what to work on. The research plan will tell you, and then you can jump right in. With this direction and decision-making support, the research plan helps you stay on track. Hopefully you're now convinced that a research plan is a good idea. But what exactly is a research plan? A research plan consists of 4 elements: a research question, the core ideas, the kinds of supporting evidence you'll need, and where you'll search for that supporting evidence. Let's discuss each element and then we'll review a sample research plan. The first step, and probably the most important, is to determine your research question. This is a brief explanation of exactly what question you're trying to answer with your research. This should be a question that isn't already answered by the existing research. You're trying to fill a gap in our shared knowledge. It's critical to pin down the specifics of your research questions before moving on, or else you'll wind up wasting time and backtracking and wandering in confusion. Seek feedback from your professor, advisor, or librarian if needed. When you think you've got a firm research question, ask yourself 4 questions about it. Is it relevant? Are you certain the question is very clear and unambiguous, so you're actually asking the right question to get the answers you seek? Is it specific? Can your question be more detailed, or can the wording be more precise? If a stranger read your research question, are you 100% sure they would understand it in the same way you do, so there's no room for mix-ups? Is it focused? Sometimes a one-sentence question can actually hide several smaller questions inside of it. Make sure you're asking just one question. You don't want any implied underlying questions that have to be answered before you get to answer your research question. Finally, is it education focused? As you probably know, education shares interests and overlaps with many other academic fields. It's easy to accidentally stray into questions that are better suited for sociology, psychology, political science, and so on. If your research question overlaps with another field, make sure your focus is firmly on the education aspect of it, and the other field is just informing your research. Your research question should come from gaps in the education literature, and when it's answered, it will fill a gap in the education literature. Once you have a research question that passes the test we just discussed, you will need to identify the core ideas. You can also think of these as major points or themes. Basically, these are the broad ideas that your reader has to understand if they're going to understand your research. Sometimes these core ideas are so big that you want to break them down further into smaller ideas. That's great. Feel free to do that. Just start with 3 or 4 core ideas in the beginning. As you start reviewing the literature on your topic, you might get ideas for more core ideas, or you might realize that you need to explain another aspect. Keep adding core ideas as needed throughout your research project. When you have identified a few core ideas, move on to identifying supporting evidence. For each core idea, you will need supporting evidence or facts to illustrate the point. You can't just state a core idea and expect your reader to take your word for it. You need to show that your idea is supported by existing research. For each core idea, ask yourself, what kind of evidence will illustrate this point best? Different core ideas demand different evidence: student test scores, or demographic data, or definitions of a learning disability, or results from a nationwide research study, for example. A word of caution. We often want to go find all the evidence immediately, right when we're thinking about it. Pause. Just identify the kinds of evidence you'll need. You'll track down the actual evidence later. This way, you can be more efficient during your searching time. When you know what kind of supporting evidence you need, you can decide where you might find it. If you know of a specific place to look, then write that down. Otherwise, just be as specific as possible given what you know now. Getting this organized in advance will help you search more efficiently, saving time and effort. Often, the default place to look is education databases, like ERIC. That's a great place to look for a lot of your evidence, especially if you want reports of scholarly research. However, it's not the only place, and it's not a good source for a lot of the information you'll need. For example, you might want statistics or demographic information from government or nonprofit websites. You might want federal, state, or local government reports. You might get discussions of best practices from trade publications intended for teachers' professional development. Reference books like the DSM-5 are good sources of basic definitions and background information, while theory books help you understand the theoretical framework of research. Professional organizations might provide stats, best practices, and many other kinds of non-scholarly evidence. When you've pulled it all together, your research plan will look something like this. You'll have a research question, then core ideas. Each core idea will list the kinds of evidence needed and where you'll look for the evidence. Here's an example of a research plan. The research question is, how does experiential outdoor learning, an element of three-dimensional learning, impact teacher perception of student engagement in a Northeast Georgia middle school? It's relevant, focused, specific, and education-centered. The first core idea identified is experiential outdoor learning, or EOL. Here's what our readers need to understand about EOL in order to understand our project. The definition of EOL, benefits and concerns about EOL, and the prevalence of EOL in action. To get that information, we might look at professional associations or journals focused on science education. We would also look at education databases. The next core idea is three-dimensional learning. To explain three-dimensional learning, we need to find definitions and descriptions of three-dimensional learning standards, plus best practices for science lesson planning. For that kind of evidence, we'd look at trade literature and reports on science lesson planning, including these specific frameworks and standards. We would also look at education databases. We would continue on with our core ideas, and for each new core idea, we'd identify kinds of evidence and where to find it. We might start out with just a few, but keep adding on as we discover new relevant ideas during our literature searching. I hope this video has helped you understand the purpose and structure of a research plan. If you need any help with your research, remember to ask your librarian.